What if the person who empties your office trash is fighting a hidden war against childhood hunger right under your nose? 18.4% of American households with children couldn't reliably put food on the table last year. That's 14.1 million kids. This is the story of one janitor, one little girl, and a secret that stayed hidden until a CEO rewound the security footage and realized the quiet man in the blue uniform was saving far more than just leftovers. For 6 months, Marcus Jefferson's nightly routine was clockwork. After the corporate events ended, he'd wrap a plate of untouched food and wait for the shy 8-year-old who appeared in the lobby after hours. He told security she was his niece, but the truth was, he'd never seen her before that first night she wandered in, shivering and alone. His act of quiet defiance against waste was also a lifeline. Until the night the system watched back, and the CEO saw a face on the monitor he never expected to see again. Marcus Jefferson was 52 years old and had been cleaning the 32 floors of the Ascendant Tower for 11 years. He knew which executives stayed past 8, which cleaning supplies the night supervisor would short, and precisely when the catering staff cleared the events on the penthouse level. His shift started at 10 p.m., but he arrived at 9:30 every night, parking his 15-year-old sedan in the farthest employee spot, wearing the same blue uniform with his name stitched in white thread just above the heart. He was what the building management called a reliable asset. Quiet, thorough, invisible. But Marcus carried an invisible weight of his own. 4 years prior, his sister Alicia had lost her battle with a rare autoimmune disease. She'd been a single mother, and with her gone, the care of her then 4-year-old daughter, Chloe, fell to a broken foster system. Marcus had petitioned for custody, but a combination of his income, his work hours, and a decades-old misdemeanor from his 20s placed him low on the priority list. The court appointed a cousin in another state as guardian, and Marcus lost track of them within a year. The grief of losing his sister fused with the helplessness of losing her child. He cleaned the marble lobbies of a billion-dollar corporation while his own family was scattered beyond his reach. The tower itself was a monument to disparity. Ascendant Capital managed over $80 billion in assets. Its CEO, Robert Thorne, had a net worth hovering around $900 million. The building's art collection alone was valued at more than the annual budgets of the 5 elementary schools in the surrounding district. And every Tuesday and Thursday, the executive dining room hosted luncheons and client dinners, where per-person catering costs routinely exceeded Marcus's weekly take-home pay. This is where the system becomes visible. Research shows that in the United States, an estimated 53 million people serve as informal, often unpaid caregivers, frequently skipping meals themselves to feed those in their care. For low-wage service workers like Marcus, food insecurity isn't an abstract statistic, it's a daily calculation. And in neighborhoods like the one surrounding Ascendant Tower, nearly 1 in 3 Black households with children reported not having enough food in 2024. Enter the girl. Her name was Maya. She was 8. She first appeared on a rainy Thursday in October, a small figure in a too-thin jacket peering through the glass doors of the lobby after the day's security desk shift changed. Marcus found her sitting on a planter, soaked and shivering. He didn't ask questions. He went back to the staff break room, made a cup of hot cocoa from the machine, and brought it to her with a leftover muffin from that afternoon's meeting. She took it with silent, wide eyes, and was gone by the time he finished mopping the east wing. She returned the following week, and the week after that, a pattern emerged. She would appear between 8:15 and 8:45, always alone. Marcus learned she lived 3 blocks away in the low-rise apartments visible from the tower's upper floors. Her mother, he gradually pieced together from fragments Maya shared, worked 2 jobs, one as a home health aide days, another as a stock clerk nights. The gaps in supervision were filled by a patchwork of neighbors and an older brother who was rarely home. Maya's after-school program ended at 6. Dinner was often whatever was left in the cupboard. Marcus's solution was simple, born of witnessing waste on a staggering scale. The evening events always overordered. Trays of salmon, carved beef, vegetable tarts and desserts would return to the kitchen largely untouched, destined for compaction. The official policy, outlined in Employee Handbook Section 7.2, stated all unused food was corporate property to be disposed of as per the vendor contract. Taking it was grounds for immediate termination. He began saving a single plate, not from greed but from a specific aching recognition. He would prepare a balanced meal, protein, vegetable, starch, cover it with foil, and place it in his designated locker. At 8:30, he would take his authorized break, meet Maya in the seldom-used seating area near the north elevators, and watch her eat. He told the overnight security guard, Jorge, that she was his niece, coming by so he could check her homework. Jorge, a grandfather of 5 himself, would nod and look the other way. For Marcus, this wasn't charity, it was restitution. It was feeding one child when he couldn't feed his own. It was a quiet rebellion against a system that valued disposability over dignity. For Maya, it was the one predictable, nourishing point in her uncertain days. She started bringing her spelling lists. He would quiz her under the cool glow of the lobby sconces. She called him Mr. J. Meanwhile, in the penthouse, Robert Thorne was wrestling with a different kind of emptiness. At 68, he had built an empire but presided over a fragmented family. His only son, David, had severed contact nearly a decade ago after a bitter dispute over David's choice to pursue social work instead of finance. The last Thorne had heard, David was living somewhere in the city, but the silence was absolute. Robert's ex-wife had passed away 2 years prior. His mansion in the hills was filled with the silence of abandoned wings. He dealt with this isolation the way he dealt with everything, through data and control. 6 months before Marcus first met Maya, Robert had approved a comprehensive upgrade to the building's security infrastructure. The proposal cited liability reduction and asset protection. The new system included high-resolution cameras with facial recognition software and AI-driven anomaly detection, capable of flagging loitering, unauthorized entry, and as the vendor brochure noted, internal resource diversion. 96% of large companies now use some form of employee monitoring software. Robert reviewed the reports every Monday morning. The system was what flagged the anomaly. Every Tuesday and Thursday between 8:20 and 8:50 p.m., the AI noted a minor recurrent visitor in the lobby, interacting with a uniformed employee. The log listed it as a low-priority pattern, but on a cold night in February, Robert was working late. A notification pinged on his security dashboard. Extended unauthorized lobby occupancy. Minor present. He clicked the alert, expecting to see a homeless person. The feed opened, showing a live view from camera 12. He saw his janitor, Jefferson, sitting with a little girl. They had a textbook open between them. Then Marcus handed her a foil-covered plate. The girl opened it, and even on the grainy feed, Robert could see the steam rise. He watched, a cold knot forming in his stomach, a violation of policy, a liability nightmare. He was about to call security to have them both removed when the girl turned slightly, laughing at something Marcus said. The camera caught her profile clearly, the shape of her nose, the particular way her hair fell. Robert Thorne froze. His hand, reaching for the phone, stopped midair. He leaned closer to the monitor, his breath catching. The girl's face, illuminated by the lobby's light, mirrored a face from an old, painful family portrait. It was the face of his son, David. It was the face he hadn't seen in nearly a decade. This wasn't just a random child. This was his granddaughter. For a full minute, Robert Thorne didn't move. The hum of his computer, the distant whisper of the building's HVAC system, all sound receded. On the screen, the grainy image held a ghost. His mind raced through a brutal calculus, policy violation, trespassing, liability. But those were corporate reflexes. Beneath them surged something raw and paternal, a feeling he hadn't accessed in a decade. He minimized the live feed and, with fingers that felt oddly clumsy, opened the security archive. He typed in parameters, camera 12, Tuesdays and Thursdays, 8 p.m. to 9 p.m. the past 3 months. A grid of thumbnails populated his screen. He clicked the earliest one. There she was, smaller in a pink backpack. He clicked another, and another. A timeline of secret dinners unfolded. He saw Marcus Jefferson's patient posture, the way he'd smoothed the foil off the plate. He saw the girl's shoulders relax as she ate. He saw textbooks, a spelling bee practice sheet. He watched as the seasons changed outside the glass walls, reflected in the girl's transition from a light jacket to a heavy coat, all within the sterile, unchanging bubble of his lobby. He had to know. He opened a new browser tab and navigated to the internal human resources portal. He typed Marcus Jefferson into the employee database. The file loaded, 52 years old, 11 years of service, clean record. One address listed, a small apartment in a working-class neighborhood 40 minutes away in traffic. Next of kin, deceased sister Alicia Jefferson. There was no mention of a niece. Robert then pulled up the building access logs, cross-referencing them with facial recognition. The system had tagged the girl's face dozens of times but classified her as visitor accompanied. It had a confidence score linking her to Marcus's profile. But there was another, fainter link the AI had missed. A secondary match with a much lower confidence score buried in the system's metadata. It suggested a possible familial match to another profile in the system's broader, citywide reference database. A database Ascendant Capital subscribed to for executive security purposes. His heart hammered against his ribs. He clicked the link. It required a higher security clearance. He typed in his override code. A new profile loaded, and the air left Robert Thorne's lungs. It was his son, David. The photo was from a driver's license, 6 years old. David looked tired, older than his 38 years, his hair longer than Robert remembered. The attached address was not in some distant city, but in the low-rise Parkview apartments, 3 blocks from this very tower. The same apartments Marcus Jefferson had noted. The timeline crystallized with terrifying clarity. His estranged son had been living, struggling, practically within sight of his office window for years. And this girl, Maya, was likely David's daughter, his granddaughter. A torrent of questions drowned out his initial shock. Why was David here? Why was his daughter wandering into a corporate tower for food? Where was David now? The social worker who had rejected the family fortune. Was this the life he had chosen? Robert stood, packing the length of his darkened office. The ethical walls of his world began to blur. The surveillance system, implemented for security and efficiency, had just handed him the most personal, devastating information imaginable. Legally, he had every right to review the footage. Ethically, he had just peered into the most vulnerable moments of an employee and a child. And personally, he had stumbled upon a family tragedy he had helped create. He made a decision. He couldn't call security. He couldn't fire Marcus. Not yet. He needed to understand the full picture. He needed to see David. The next evening, Robert didn't leave. He told his assistant he was working on a sensitive merger file. Instead, he sat at his desk, watching the clock. At 8:20, right on schedule, the notification chimed. Camera 12. He opened the live feed. There they were. Marcus was waiting on the same lobby bench, a foil-covered plate beside him. At 8:27, the north revolving door turned. Maya walked in, shedding a worn backpack. She smiled, a real, unguarded smile, and scooted onto the bench. Marcus didn't hand her the plate immediately. First, he asked about her day. Robert turned up the audio feed, a tinny, distant version of their conversation coming through his speakers. How was the math test? I think I did okay. The word problems were hard. Word problems are just stories with numbers hiding in them. We'll practice. Then he handed her the plate. Roast chicken, green beans, mashed potatoes. Food from the board lunch that afternoon. Robert watched her eat with the focused intensity of a hungry child. He saw Marcus pull a small container of fruit salad from his jacket pocket, extra, not from the main plate. A dessert she hadn't expected. Her face lit up. This wasn't a sneaky employee pilfering leftovers. This was a ritual of care, and Robert was witnessing it through a lens of corporate oversight, feeling like a voyeur in his own building. The disconnect was monstrous. He needed a ground truth. The following day, Robert did something he hadn't done in 15 years. He left the tower during lunch. He drove the 3 blocks to the Parkview apartments. The building was a stark contrast to his tower, weathered stucco, a chain-link fence around a tiny, patchy playground. He sat in his sedan, anonymous behind tinted windows, and watched. At 3:15, a school bus wheezed to a stop. Children spilled out. Among them was Maya, her pink backpack unmistakable. She walked alone to the building's entrance, dug a key from her pocket, and let herself in. Robert waited. An hour passed. No parent arrived. No David. Using his resources, he commissioned a discreet background check. It returned within 48 hours, painting a picture of quiet crisis. David Thorne was indeed a social worker, employed by the city's underfunded Family Services Department. His salary was a fraction of what Robert paid his junior analysts. 6 months ago, David's wife, Alina, had been seriously injured in a hit-and-run accident while crossing the street to her job as a pharmacy technician. She was now in a prolonged rehabilitation facility, facing a mountain of medical debt. David was now a single father working full-time while also being one of America's estimated 53 million informal caregivers, juggling visits to his wife, care for his daughter, and a job that paid an emotional toll more than dollars. The report noted that David had applied for and been denied a promotion 3 times. It listed his current financial pressures, medical bills, credit card debt, looming rent increase. There was no mention of any contact with Robert Thorne. His son had chosen to drown in plain sight rather than ask for help. The weight of this knowledge settled on Robert like a physical burden. His anger at David's rebellion, carefully nurtured over years, now felt petty and cruel. His son wasn't living some idealistic, simple life. He was being crushed by the very systemic pressures Robert's world often exacerbated. And his granddaughter was paying the price, finding sustenance from a janitor because the gaps in the social safety net were too wide. Robert's next move was tactical. He couldn't reveal what he knew, not directly. He instructed the head of building security to temporarily disable the AI anomaly alerts for the main lobby between 8 and 9 p.m., citing a calibration period for the new system. He ensured Marcus Jefferson's upcoming routine performance review was marked for his personal attention. Then he turned his focus to the source of the food. He summoned the director of corporate catering, a woman named Susan Choi. He didn't mention Marcus or the girl. Instead, he framed it as a sustainability and community outreach initiative. "Susan, what happens to the untouched food from our events?" "Sir, per the vendor contract and policy, it's collected for organic waste composting. It's a green initiative we've touted in our annual ESG report." "How much in weight or value would you estimate we discard weekly?" She consulted a tablet. "For the executive dining room and client events, an average of 200 to 250 pounds of viable food per week." "Viable food," Robert repeated. "And what is the liability barrier to donating it?" "The primary concern is the Good Samaritan Food Act protection, which we have. The bigger hurdles are logistics, cooling, and transportation to a qualified nonprofit. The cost-benefit analysis has historically shown—" "Redo the analysis," Robert interrupted, his tone leaving no room for debate. "I want a proposal on my desk by Friday for a pilot program to partner with a local shelter or food kitchen. Full liability waivers, streamlined logistics. Budget is not the primary constraint. Efficiency and dignity are." Susan blinked, surprised by the directive from a CEO who usually focused on quarterly returns. "Yes, sir. I'll have the team on it immediately." Back in his office, Robert knew this was a long-term fix, a systemic tweak. It did nothing for Maya tonight, or for Marcus, who was now an unwitting link in a chain of familial disconnection. The janitor had become the de facto guardian, filling a role Robert had abdicated. He pulled up Marcus's employee file again. He looked at the date of his sister's death. He saw the lack of emergency contacts. This man, too, was alone. Two men, separated by 40 floors and a chasm of wealth, were both quietly tending to the fractures in a single family, a family that legally bound one of them and emotionally bound the other, yet neither knew the full story. The following Tuesday, Robert watched the feed again. This time, his feelings had shifted from shock to a profound, uncomfortable empathy. He saw Marcus help Maya with a history worksheet on the California gold rush. He heard her ask, "Mr. J, did people really get rich that fast?" Marcus paused, considering his words. Some did, most didn't. The real wealth was often picked up by the people selling the shovels, not the ones digging. It was a startlingly astute economic lesson from a janitor to a child. Robert found himself leaning forward, listening. The cliffhanger was no longer about getting caught. It was about the impending collision of these two secret narratives. Robert held all the pieces: Marcus's job in his hands, David's desperate situation on a report, Maya's well-being observed nightly. The power dynamic was absolute, but for the first time, power felt like a prison. He could terminate Marcus for theft, fulfilling corporate policy but destroying a crucial lifeline. He could storm into David's life with his wealth, repeating the paternalistic control that drove him away. Or he could do something else entirely. He closed the live feed. The image of his granddaughter's face, smiling up at a man who was not her grandfather, lingered. He had built an empire on making bold decisions with calculated risks, but this wasn't a hostile takeover or a market bet. This was a fragile human equation. One wrong move could shatter the delicate, secret support system keeping a little girl fed and a family afloat. The surveillance had given him knowledge, but it offered no wisdom on what to do next. He was now the outsider looking in, and the view from the penthouse had never felt so isolating or so full of consequence. Robert Thorne's first attempt at anonymous help was a disaster. Using a third-party attorney, he arranged for an anonymous grant to cover David's wife Alina's mounting rehabilitation costs. The check arrived at David's apartment with a typed letter citing a community caregiver support fund. David, trained in social work to spot paternalistic charity, was immediately suspicious. He called the law firm listed on the letterhead. When they refused to disclose the donor, he mailed the check back unsigned. Robert watched the security feed that night and saw the effect. David arrived at the lobby exhausted to pick up Maya early. His face was etched with a new layer of stress. He thanked Marcus, then in a low voice Robert strained to hear said, "Some anonymous donor tried to give me money today. Feels like someone's watching." Marcus simply nodded and said, "The world's full of watchers, not enough doers." The near miss forced Robert to recalibrate. He couldn't buy his way back in. Meanwhile, a different threat was materializing for Marcus. The new sustainability initiative Robert had ordered required the catering staff to weigh and log all food waste. Susan Choi, the catering director, was determined to impress the CEO. Her team began scrutinizing the leftovers. A junior staff member reviewing the logs noticed a discrepancy. The weight of discarded food from the executive board lunch was off by approximately one standard meal portion. It was a tiny variance, but in a new system chasing efficiency, it was flagged. Susan didn't connect it to the janitor. She suspected her own staff of snacking. She instituted spot checks and locked the coolers. For Marcus, the locked cooler meant the end of his secret supply chain. That Thursday when Maya arrived, he had no plate. He had bought a sandwich with his own money. Maya noticed the difference. "No chicken tonight, Mr. J," he smiled, a tired smile. "Change of menu. This is a special turkey club." He watched her eat the sandwich, knowing his $8 purchase was a significant cut into his own grocery budget. He couldn't sustain this. Robert, monitoring the feed, saw the sandwich. He saw the locked cooler on the kitchen camera. His well-intentioned policy was now actively harming the very child he wanted to help. The system, even when tweaked for good, was creating collateral damage. He had to act more directly, but how? Then the crisis hit. David's wife, Alina, took a turn for the worse. A secondary infection set in, requiring a transfer to a specialized unit and a new experimental treatment not covered by their exhausted insurance. The cost was astronomical. David, faced with a choice between his wife's potential recovery and financial ruin, broke. He did the one thing he'd sworn never to do. He drove to Ascendant Tower. Robert was in a late meeting when his assistant's voice came over the intercom, tense. "Mr. Thorne, there's a David Thorne here to see you. He says he's your son." The room went silent. Robert dismissed his executives with a wave. "Send him in." The man who entered was a ghost of the idealistic son Robert remembered. David's jacket was worn at the elbows, his eyes hollow with sleepless stress. He didn't sit. He stood in the middle of the immense office, looking at his father for the first time in nearly 10 years. "I need a loan," David said, the words ripped from him. "Not a gift, a loan with interest for Alina." He laid out the medical facts, the costs, his plan to repay. It was a clinical, desperate presentation. Robert felt a surge of conflicting emotions, heartbreak at his son's pain, a flicker of satisfaction at being needed, and a crushing guilt that it had come to this. "David, you don't need a loan. I'll cover it. All of it." "No," David said, his voice cracking. "That's the old pattern. You throw money at the problem and it comes with strings, with expectations. I want a business transaction. That's the only language you ever respected." It was a brutal mirror held up to Robert's life. Before he could formulate a response, David dropped the second bombshell. "And I need you to leave Maya alone. I know about the anonymous grant. I don't know how you found out about us, but stay away from my daughter." Robert was stunned. "Maya, David, I would never." But David wasn't finished. The stress and anger overflowed. "You think I do know? The fancy food she comes home talking about, the nice man in the building. I put it together. You've been, what, having your staff feed her, monitoring her. Is this another one of your corporate outreach experiments?" In that moment, Robert realized the catastrophic misunderstanding. David thought the CEO was behind the meals. He had no idea about Marcus Jefferson. The secret kindness of a janitor was about to be erased, credited to the paternalistic interference of a billionaire grandfather. And in correcting the record, Robert would have to confess to his own surveillance, exposing Marcus and likely getting him fired. "David," Robert said slowly, choosing his words with more care than he'd ever used in a boardroom. "The man who feeds Maya isn't my staff, not in the way you think." He made a decision. He turned his monitor around. He pulled up the archived security footage from a random Tuesday 2 months prior. He pressed play. The video showed the lobby, Marcus Jefferson sitting with Maya, helping her with homework, then handing her the full-covered plate. David watched, his anger dissolving into confusion, then dawning horror. "Who is that?" David whispered. "One of my janitors, Marcus Jefferson. He's been doing this for months. I only found out because my security system flagged it." David stared at the screen, at the gentle patience of the stranger with his child. "Why?" "I don't know his full reasons, but I've watched him. He cares for her." Robert paused. "I've been watching them both, trying to figure out how to help without making everything worse." The revelation unmoored David. His daughter had been receiving essential care from a stranger, a secret his own pride and struggle had kept him from seeing. The safety net he had failed to provide was being woven by a minimum-wage employee. The humiliation was profound. At that exact moment, downstairs, Marcus's world was collapsing from a different direction. The catering director, Susan, had reviewed the access logs for the service kitchen. The only non-catering employee with consistent after-hours access was Marcus Jefferson, whose cleaning route included the area. She reported her suspicion of petty theft to the head of building security. The head of security, remembering the CEO's specific instruction to ignore lobby anomalies, was in a bind. He decided to handle it by the book. He pulled Marcus into a small, windowless office on the B level at the start of his shift. "Marcus, we need to ask you about some missing property. Food from the event's kitchen. The logs show you're in there every night." Marcus, standing in his uniform, felt the ground fall away. He thought of Maya waiting upstairs. He thought of his job, his rent. He said nothing. "We can do this the easy way," the security head said. "Admit to taking the food, sign a statement, and we terminate you for cause. No police. Or we can review all the footage, involve the catering company, and see what charges they want to press." Upstairs, Robert's personal phone buzzed. A text from the head of security. "We may have an internal theft issue. Janitor Marcus Jefferson suspected. Confronting him now. Will update." Robert's blood ran cold. He looked from the text to his son, who was still reeling from the video. "David, I have to go downstairs, right now." "Why?" "Because the man who feeds your daughter is about to be fired for stealing the food he gave her." The two men, father and son, locked eyes across a chasm of years in pain. In that instant, the personal and the corporate, the secret and the revealed, collided with irreversible force. The system designed to protect assets was seconds away from punishing the one person who had acted with pure humanity. And Robert Thorne had to choose, finally, which side of the glass he was on. He moved toward the door, not as a CEO, but as a man racing to intercept a terrible, bureaucratic mistake. The next 5 minutes would determine the fate of 3 lives and redefine what family and responsibility truly meant. Robert Thorne didn't wait for the elevator. He took the fire stairs, his dress shoes echoing on the concrete, David a half step behind him. They burst through the door onto the B level, the harsh fluorescent light of the service corridor a stark contrast to the penthouse's muted tones. Robert followed the sound of voices to a closed door marked "Security Interview." He didn't knock. He entered. Inside, Marcus Jefferson stood facing the head of security, a man named Reynolds. Marcus's posture was rigid, his hands clenched at his sides. Reynolds looked up, startled. "Mr. Thorne, sir, we're handling an internal." "I know what you're handling," Robert cut him off, his voice low but filling the small room. "Leave us." Reynolds hesitated, then nodded, exiting and closing the door behind him. The room held 3 men, bound by a secret only one of them fully understood. Marcus looked from the CEO to the stranger beside him, confusion and dread on his face. Robert spoke first directly to Marcus. "Mr. Jefferson, this is David Thorne. His daughter is Maya." The blood drained from Marcus's face. The lie he'd told for months, "She's my niece," dissolved in an instant. He looked at David, seeing the resemblance around the eyes. I'm sorry. I didn't know. She was hungry." David stepped forward, his own anger and pride gone, replaced by a raw, shaky gratitude. "You've been feeding her. You've been sitting with her. Thank you." The words were simple, devastatingly sincere. Marcus shook his head, as if deflecting the thanks. "It was just leftovers. It was going in the trash." "It wasn't just food," David said, his voice thick. "She talks about you. Mr. J, who helps with her spelling, who tells her stories. I haven't been able to be there. My wife," he trailed off. Robert watched the exchange, the power dynamics in the room utterly transformed. The janitor was now the central figure, the caregiver. The CEO and the father were the supplicants. He cleared his throat. "Mr. Jefferson, you are not in trouble. You will not be fired. What you did, it revealed a failure in this company, a failure in policy and a failure in me." He laid it out plainly. He explained the surveillance, his own discovery, his failed attempts to help anonymously. He admitted his relationship to David and Maya. Marcus listened, absorbing the incredible truth. The girl he'd fed was the CEO's granddaughter. The man who signed his paycheck was the grandfather who didn't know her. "So what happens now?" Marcus asked, the practical question of a man used to navigating systems. "Now," Robert said, We fix the system, and we start with you. He made 3 promises on the spot. First, Marcus's actions would be formally reclassified from theft to informal community aid, with a retroactive commendation added to his file. Second, he would be promoted to a newly created role, Facilities Community Liaison. His duties would formally include managing the new corporate food donation program Robert had initiated, ensuring surplus food reached community centers and families in need, starting with a partnership with the local shelter. His pay would increase by 30%. Marcus was stunned into silence. Robert's third promise was to David. The treatment for Alina is covered, not as a loan, not as a gift, as family. And your job, if you want it, there's a position heading corporate social responsibility for the Thorne Family Foundation. You know where the gaps are. You can help us fill them properly. David looked at his father, then at Marcus. The offer wasn't a handout. It was a partnership built on the very ethics he'd always valued. He gave a single, slow nod. But the most delicate thread was Maya. The 3 men agreed that Marcus would explain the change to her, with David present. That evening, they sat in the lobby, the usual bench now a site of profound convergence. Maya arrived, her eyes widening at seeing her father and Mr. J together, with a serious-looking stranger standing slightly apart. Marcus spoke gently. "Maya, this is my boss, Mr. Thorne, and he's also your grandfather, your dad's dad." Maya looked at Robert, then at her father. "I have a grandpa." David put his arm around her. "You do, sweetheart, and he wants to get to know you if that's okay." Maya, with the pragmatic acceptance of a child, shrugged. "Okay, does he like spelling bees too?" The tension broke. Robert, the billionaire, crouched down awkwardly. "I don't know many words," he said, "but I'd like to learn." In the weeks that followed, the changes rippled outward. The food donation program, now co-designed by Marcus and David, launched successfully. 250 pounds of food, a week stopped going to compost and started going to the Parkview Apartments Community Center and a women's shelter. Marcus, in his new role, coordinated it all, his understanding of the building's rhythms and the community's needs making it efficient and respectful. David joined the foundation. His first project was creating a fund to cover emergency costs for low-income caregivers, named the Alicia Jefferson Respite Fund, after Marcus's sister. The paperwork cited research that over 53 million informal caregivers in the U.S. often face food and financial insecurity, and the fund aimed to provide immediate, no-strings support. Robert and David began the slow, halting work of rebuilding a relationship. It wasn't in boardrooms, but at Alina's bedside or at Maya's school plays. Robert learned to listen. David learned to accept help without seeing it as control. And then came the final, surprising detail. While helping Marcus sort through his sister's old paperwork for the fund's namesake, David found a photograph. It was of a young Alicia Jefferson standing with a group of friends at a community college charity drive. One of the other young women in the photo was familiar. David showed it to his father. Robert stared. The other woman was Patricia, his late wife. She had volunteered at the same drive decades ago before Robert had even met her. A forgotten connection, a thread of kindness woven long before any of them knew it would be needed. Marcus looked at the photo of his sister, standing next to the grandmother of the child he would later feed, and felt a circle click shut. It was a coincidence, but it felt like a hidden pattern finally revealing itself. The story didn't end with a fairy tale merger. Maya still lived with David in their apartment. Alina recovered slowly, her medical battle long. Marcus still woke up early for his job, but the hidden war was over. The secret was now a foundation. The surveillance system that started it all was reprogrammed with new parameters, its primary alert not for theft, but for identifying patterns of need within the building's ecosystem. Robert Thorne learned that the greatest return on investment isn't always on a balance sheet. Sometimes, it's in the quiet repair of a family, in the dignity of a worker promoted for his compassion, and in the full belly of a child who no longer has to wander into a lobby looking for a meal. The system hadn't been broken by a janitor taking leftovers. It had been broken by seeing that act as a problem, instead of a profound human solution. They fixed the system by finally recognizing the value of what was already, quietly, being done. The story of Marcus, Maya, and Robert is more than a singular twist of fate. It is a lens that focuses a harsh, revealing light on the systems we take for granted. It asks a fundamental question. In a world where 96% of companies monitor their employees, what are we truly looking for? Are we auditing for compliance, or are we watching for moments of human need that our policies have failed to address? The 14.1 million children in America facing food insecurity are not abstract statistics. They are Mayas, sitting in classrooms with empty stomachs, their potential dimmed by hunger. The 53 million informal caregivers are not a distant demographic. They are Davids and Marcuses, stretching themselves thin, often skipping meals so their loved ones can eat. The disparity is not an accident. It is an outcome. Black households with children experience food insecurity at nearly triple the rate of white households. This isn't just about poverty. It's about the architecture of opportunity and who it is designed to shelter. Marcus Jefferson's quiet rebellion began not with a protest, but with a covered plate. It was a solution crafted in the gaps of a broken system. Robert Thorne's journey began not with generosity, but with surveillance. He was forced to see what his own rules had rendered invisible. The real transformation occurred when observation turned into recognition, and recognition demanded a redesign. This is the lingering question the story leaves with us. How many acts of essential care are happening right now in the shadows of our institutions, labeled as violations, simply because our systems value property over people? How many Marcuses are out there, bridging gaps with quiet courage, their compassion mislabeled as theft? And how many of us, in positions of oversight, are watching the wrong things? True change doesn't always start with grand initiatives. Sometimes, it starts when we have the courage to reinterpret what we see. To see a janitor not as a cost center, but as a community asset. To see surplus not as waste, but as a resource. To see family not as a transactional unit, but as a web of connection that can be frayed by pride and repaired by humility. If this story resonated with you, consider what it reveals about the unseen networks of care in your own world. Who are the quiet guardians? Where are the gaps they are filling? And what can you do to support them, to make their compassion not a secret act of defiance, but a celebrated cornerstone of how we operate? We tell these stories to remind us of our shared humanity, to challenge the cold logic of systems, and to highlight that the most powerful solutions are often born from simple, empathetic action. Thank you for watching. If you want to see more content that explores the hidden connections and quiet heroes around us, please subscribe to our channel. Hit the like button if this story moved you, and share it with someone who needs to be reminded that no act of kindness, no matter how small, is ever wasted. We'll see you in the next story.